let's take a look. The language at number 10 is Western Punjabi, aka Landa. Estimates of around 118 million native speakers are for this language, and it is a Pakistani language that primarily includes Western Punjabi. Now that doesn't even include Eastern Punjabi, which is also spoken in India. Now, Punjab was divided by the British back in 1947, and millions of people had to be forced to leave their homes, but the group has continued to increase. Also, Punjabi music has gained massive popularity, not just in Pakistan, but also in India and around the world now. Next up, we have Japanese at number 9 with 128 million native speakers. Almost all of the 128 million native speakers live in Japan, which makes Japanese the highest geographically concentrated language that's going to be featured in this episode. Japanese has two writing systems. The first one is called hiragana, and then the second one is called katakana. They also use the Chinese kanji characters. Now, in other parts of the world, the biggest collections of Japanese speakers can be found in the United States, the Philippines, and over in Brazil. We move over into Russia, Mother Russia, at number 8 with 153 million native speakers. Russian is an East Slavic language of a wider Indo-European family. Now, Russian is the 8th most spoken language in the world based on native speakers, of course. Russian is used officially, or at least in day-to-day life, in all of the post-Soviet nation states. Large numbers of Russian speakers can also be found in various other countries like Israel and even Mongolia. It's also one of the 6 languages spoken in the United Nations. Portuguese, they have 220 million native speakers. The spread of the Portuguese language is due in part to colonialism. Well, it's due a lot to that actually. Now, in the 15th century, the Portuguese brought their language to different parts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. As the Portuguese colonized other countries, they then began to develop their own version of the language. And Portuguese is now spoken in countries like Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, as well as many other countries, all of which have like their own variation of the Portuguese language, some very completely different than others. But moving on now to number 6, we have Bengali with 228 million native speakers. The partition of Bengal by the British happened in the year 1947, and it divided the mainly Hindu West Bengal, now part of India, from its mainly Muslim counterpart, which was East Bengal, now known as Bangladesh. Now, it is a language of Kolkata as well as the Andaman Islands, and it's also the language of 100+ million Bangladeshis. The Bengali alphabet is believed to have evolved from the modified Brahmic script from around 1000 CE. Number 5, we have Arabic. Arabic has 315 million native speakers, and this is all based on recent numbers. Arabic, like Chinese, is so different in its dialects, so there are many forms of Arabic, but at its root, Arabic is a Semitic language that first came about in the 1st to the 4th century CE. Now we have modern standard Arabic, and that's a primarily written form, and it's closely related to the classic Arabic of the Quran. The Hindi language comes in at number 4 with 341 million total native speakers. India has many languages, with Hindi as the most dominant one, but Hindi is spoken mainly in the northern part of India as well as different parts of Pakistan as well. Now, Hindi is written in the Devanagari script, and it's one of the 2 official languages of the government of India along with the English language. So if you ever go and visit India, learning a little bit of Hindi is definitely going to be very beneficial. Also, Hindi cinema, aka Bollywood, is number 1 in the world by the number of feature films that it produces each year. Okay, so we finally made it to number 3, and that's English at 379 million native speakers. If you're watching this video, you most likely are a native English speaker, or at least one of the 753 million people who speak it as a second language. So when you compare it to Chinese, it's relatively easy to learn English. You can pick it up a lot easier, and as well as the influence of American culture around the world really means that English will continue to be a dominant force when it comes to language all across the world for the foreseeable future. Yeah, I don't see the growth of English going down anytime soon. English is by far the most commonly studied foreign language in the entire world. And for many people, just learning English, it's actually synonymous for having a better life and opening up more opportunity in life. And I still hear people sometimes saying like, oh my God, I hate the English language. My language is so much more beautiful. And you could be right. Sure, I'm not gonna debate that, but it's no doubt that learning English really opens up a lot of doors right now, especially just in our world. That's just the way it is right now. Another language that opens up a lot of doors for people is Spanish, with 460 million total native speakers. They come in at number 2. As with all of the languages that I featured in this episode, there's a lot of politics attached to it, as well as how people associate with that language and people's opinions about the language. It's all debatable and whatever. But definitely Spanish is certainly a primary language of most of Central America, Spain, of course, and large parts of the United States. Learning Spanish in many cases is seen as a status symbol also. Spanish is one of the 6 languages of the United Nations, and it's also used as an official language by the European Union, as well as the Organization of American States, the Union of South American Nations, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, the African Union, and many other organizations internationally. So you'll often find people doubling up. They're learning English and Spanish, even French, but French isn't in this episode because it doesn't make it when it comes to native speakers, by the way. I know some of you may have been expecting to see French on this list. Now we got one more spot. At number 1, we have Chinese with 1.3 billion native speakers. And that's according to the latest estimates. Again, every number in this episode, they're all estimates, by the way. It's impossible to really verify to 100%, but they're pretty accurate for the most part. So Chinese is a group of languages, and roughly 917 million of them speak Mandarin. But there is no doubt that it is the most spoken language in the world, period. Chinese, like I mentioned, it's a blanket term because there are many Chinese languages, and the varieties of these Chinese languages are usually considered by native speakers to be regional variations. However, due to the degree in which the languages vary, they are generally viewed as distinct languages. Chinese is a tonal language, so grasping it fully will be a nice little challenge for you. Many things are taken into consideration when analyzing the world's most powerful languages, and we can categorize these reasons in 5 main categories, which are the ability to travel widely, the ability to earn a livelihood and participate in an economy, the ability to communicate with others, the ability to acquire knowledge and consume media, and the ability to engage in diplomacy and international relations. Let's take a look at the PLI, or the Power Language Index. This is a system that is used to compare the efficiency of more than 100 languages in these 5 specific categories that I mentioned. It does so by setting to the languages a set of 20 indicators, such as GDP per capita, tourist flows, and the number of speakers in a coherent and robust way. Each of the languages is ranked for the doors that it opens in each of the domains, labeled geography, economy, communication, knowledge and media, and diplomacy. Those are the blanket terms that we're going to be using. And then an overall score is taken from these 5 sub-rankings, with diplomacy giving less weight than the first 4 categories. For example, there are more Chinese-speaking people in the world than any other language, but it still ranks number 2 on the list because it's a relatively complex language. I guess I kind of spoiled the video before I got into it, but anyways, with that in mind, here's a list of the top 5 most powerful languages in the world, ranked according to the Power Language Index. Starting at number 5, and then we count down to number 1. Number 5 is the Arabic language, and its Power Language Index rating is 0.273, and the total native speakers in Arabic are 295 million. Arabic is one of the most popular international languages in the entire world, and has earned its position at number 5 due to the rapid increase in in the number of people practicing Islam. The interesting thing with Arabic is that even though the modern standard Arabic is spoken by millions of people around the world, the language can vary quite a bit from region to region due to different dialects spoken in the roughly 20 countries where it's used as the primary language. The fourth most powerful language on this list is Spanish, and the power language index rating is 0.329. There are 470 million native Spanish speakers. So Spanish, with almost 500 million native speakers, it's rapidly gaining position on the next language that's going to be in this episode. Spanish is a primary language in close to 20 countries, and it's spoken all over the world as a second language. And the next language we're looking at is French, and its power language index rating is 0.337. The total amount of French native speakers is 80 million. Societal differences also influence these rankings, which is why French comes at this position on this list. French comes in their place with results in geography and diplomacy, but is also one of the most aggressively promoted languages in the entire world. Knowing French carries a certain amount of prestige in international diplomacy. And for the language coming in second place on this list, you already guessed it because I gave it away in the intro. It's the Mandarin Chinese, and its power language index rating is 0.411. And they have a total of 960 million native speakers who speak Mandarin. So of course Mandarin is number 2 on this list because, most importantly, it has close to 1 billion native speakers, which is almost 3 times as much as any other language. But the truth is that it isn't really spoken much anywhere else outside of Southeast Asia, other than in Taiwan or other Chinese communities around the world. And although the next language on this list dominates the world in linguistic capacity, it is not impossible for Mandarin to one day challenge its supremacy, which leads to a very interesting question. Which languages would be the most powerful by the year 2050? If we're still around at that time, and if FTD Facts is still alive in the year 2050, we'll definitely be doing a video update on it. So that moves us now to number 1, our most powerful language in the world, and many of you should have guessed this by now. It's English, and its power language index rating is 0.889. There's a total of an estimated 446 million native English speakers. English is a dominant language of 3 G7 nations: United States, UK, and Canada, and the British legacy of colonization has given the language a global footprint. It's no surprise that 8 out of the 10 global financial centers in the world, including London and New York, are proficient English-speaking cities. The power of English as the most powerful language in the world has both positive and negative effects. The downside is that the Englishization, if you will, I think I just made up a word, this has creeped into other lesser known languages and cultures and threatens the survival of these lesser languages and their culture. But really, it doesn't look like the spread of English and its influence is going to be slowing down anytime soon, but we just have to wait and see. A lot could change over the next few decades.
Starting with number 10, we have Polish. As a Slavic language, Polish is one of the most difficult languages for English speakers to learn. It is very challenging to learn for 2 main reasons. The first being the sounds you need to produce with your palate, and the second, understanding the grammar. The sounds in the Polish language can actually be very subtly different from each other. To an outsider, many of the sounds may seem to be exactly the same. Now, this can be maddening for someone studying the language. Polish grammar is also very difficult compared to English grammar. Polish uses a case system of 7 different cases. So, for example, if we use the word box in the English language, the word never changes. We can say on the box, or under the box, or on top of the box. However, in Polish, the word box would change depending on the way it is used. You also have to worry about the complicated modifiers and gendering system that can make learning the language even more difficult. The word order in sentence structure is also very different. Things that we would usually put at the beginning of a sentence in English will actually be found at the end of a sentence in Polish. sounds quite confusing. Next, we have Icelandic, and while it is a very beautiful language to the ear, it is far from the most difficult language on the list. It is, however, extremely complicated. And while not an isolated language, the fact that it is spoken by less than 400,000 people on one island has certainly left it with its own oddities. The two main difficulties with learning the Icelandic language is first, pronouncing the words. Icelandic is an Indo-European language belonging to Germanic roots and is also closely related to Norwegian and Faroese. Not only are the words extremely long, the specific syllables are pronounced completely different from your typical English syllables. This could make for quite a confusing ordeal. Secondly, the conjugations are extremely confusing, with many different word endings and root words. So, for any of you English speakers heading to Iceland in hopes of learning some of the local dialect, you better prepare to be a little frustrated and humbled by this confusing yet beautiful Nordic language. All right, up next we have Navajo. Navajo is a verb-centered language where descriptions are given through verbs. There are a number of sounds in Navajo that have no equivalent to an English speaker, which makes pronunciation especially difficult. One of them being that the sentences are subject, object, verb, which can be irregular and contradictory to English sentence structures. Additionally, the language does not use adjectives and relies on verbs heavily. Because of this, much of both languages cannot be translated well between each other. Furthermore, the Navajo language doesn't have many words of Germanic or Latin influence, which would typically ease the learning process for English speakers. Next, we have a language you may not have heard of. I definitely know that I had not until now: Basque. So, like Korean, Basque is a language isolate spoken in the Basque country near Spain. While it has borrowed vocabulary from the Romantic languages, the way it is written and spoken is distinct from any other language. This even extends to differences between the several versions of Basque that still exist today. Despite being spoken by less than 700,000 people, there are at least 5 distinct Basque dialects. So not only is it tough to learn, but you need to pay attention to which version you would like to learn as well. Coming in at number 6, we have Finnish. Now, because Finnish has no connections to Latin or Germanic language groups, it has proven to be more than a mouthful for most English speakers looking to learn the language. The 15 grammatical cases in Finnish make it a challenging language to learn, as the smallest change in the end of the word can significantly change its entire meaning. In this language, case endings are added to word stems as suffixes and are used to express the same thing that prepositions would express in the English language. I know, it all sounds very confusing. Now, according to our research, learning the most difficult languages could require a minimum of 88 weeks of study time. That's 2,200 hours. That is a big investment to make. And it's no surprise that Finnish makes it onto this list. Next, we have Korean. As the most spoken language isolate, meaning a language with no clear genealogical relationship to other languages, Korean is an especially unique language. For instance, when describing an action in Korean, the subject goes first, then the object, and finally the sentence ends with the action itself. Practically, this means you would say something directly translated as "I water drink," as opposed to the English structure, "I drink water." Another major roadblock to learning Korean words is that so many of them sound so similar to each other. And since there are no characters, it's harder to build mnemonic building blocks in your mind. Coming in at number 4, we have Hungarian. Now, making the list with 26 different cases, Hungarian has some of the most difficult grammar rules that you will come across. In Hungarian, suffixes dictate tense and possession in a sentence instead of the word order, which is how most European languages tackle the problem. Moreover, subtle cultural elements within Hungarian culture make it uniquely difficult to learn. Moving on down to our next language, Japanese. Japanese is more difficult to learn than your average character-based writing system because thousands of characters have to be learned before being able to write in Japanese to any great extent. For English speakers, many of the grammatical concepts are foreign and the pronunciation is difficult. Plus, a history of isolation has made Japanese a unique language with a complicated writing system. On top of all that, Japanese also has 3 independent writing systems: hiragana, katakana, and kanji, which each have a different alphabet. On the plus side, we've read that it's somewhat easier to speak than Mandarin. All right, and in second place, we have Arabic. There are many things to consider before learning the Arabic language. As someone who lived in the Middle East for 5 years, I can attest to the difficulty of learning the Arabic language. For starters, there are dozens of varieties of the Arabic language, generally classified by the region or country in which they're spoken. That can be radically different from one another. So the first step is to choose which dialect you want to pursue, but that's the easy part. Arabic is yet another language with a non-Latin alphabet. Its 28 script letters are easier for English speakers to comprehend than the thousands of Chinese characters, but it's still an adjustment to become familiar with a new writing system. The thing that makes reading and writing in Arabic particularly challenging for beginners is the exclusion of most vowels in words. This makes translation a much more difficult task in Arabic than most other languages. Arabic is also written from right to left instead of left to right, which takes some time getting used to. There are also characteristics of spoken Arabic that make it hard to learn. Some of the sounds used don't exist in other languages or are simply unfamiliar to English speakers, including sounds made in the back of your throat, like the h in Khalid. That took a lot of practice when I first moved there. Now, the grammar is challenging too. Verbs tend to come before the subject, and you have to learn a dual form of words in addition to the singular and plural forms. All right, and arriving at number 1 on today's list, we have Mandarin. Mandarin is a language within the Chinese language group and is actually the most spoken language in the world. For an English speaker, however, mastering Mandarin is a tall order. Thanks to it being a tonal language, every sound in Mandarin's phonetic transcription system, pinyin, has 4 distinct pronunciations. Add that to the fact that Chinese is a language rich in homophones and full of idioms and aphorisms picked up over the course of its long history, and Mandarin becomes arguably the most difficult language in the world for an English speaker to learn.
Starting this video off at number 5 is Greek. Now, all prominent philosophers and scholars of the world used to think, speak, and write in Greek. The language dates back to around 1500 BC, and while modern Greek has evolved considerably from ancient times, it's still one of the most historic living languages. And there are over 34 centuries worth of records in the written word, and the majority of English words come from Greek as well as Latin. Modern Greek is often said to have started in the year 1453 AD. Today, it's the official language of Greece and Cyprus. Now we got Sumerian at number 4. So many people think that the ancient Sumerian language is the most ancient language in the world. It's not. However, Sumerian is the oldest language for which we have written samples. It was used by the people of Sumer before the 2nd millennium BCE, and it's not related to any other language existing right now. Sumerian continued to be used in written documents well after the spoken language was taken over by Akkadian language. And it's one thing to note that the Sumerian language never extended much beyond southern Mesopotamia. Moving on now to Egyptian. So the Egyptian language is known to be derived from the Afro-Asiatic languages and dates back to 3400 BC. The ancient Egyptian writings are known as hieroglyphs, and these symbols of hieroglyphics used to represent objects that existed in ancient Egypt. According to some scholars, the concept of writing words was first developed in Mesopotamia and came to Egypt through trading. Now this next one is very debatable. At number 2, we have the Tamil language. Now this is one of the oldest surviving languages in the world. It belongs to the southern branch of the Dravidian languages native to the Indian subcontinent. The earliest use of the Tamil language can be traced back to 300 BC, but its origins is believed to be around 2500 BC. The Tamil language is older than Sanskrit, and Tamil words exist in many other languages, so many scholars say that Tamil is the mother of all languages. Today, over 78 million people in the world speak Tamil. So yeah, in terms of now the oldest language in the world, well, that goes to Hebrew. Hebrew dates back to the 10th century BCE and is an ancient Semitic language which is a branch of the Afro-Asiatic language group and spoken by over 330 million people across Western Asia and North Africa. Now, there was a controversial study in 2016 that reported that the Israelites in Egypt took 22 ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and turned them into the Hebrew alphabet over 3,800 years ago, making it the oldest language in the world. Now, there are currently over 9 million Hebrew speakers in the world today.